The fluorescent lights of Davidson Corp hummed a monotonous tune, a soundtrack to my personal hell. For 5 years, David, my boss, had been the conductor of this agonizing symphony. Each day was a variation on the theme of humiliation, mistreatment, and the constant threat of being thrown under the bus. I was Jeremy, the quiet, unassuming assistant, the one who always arrived early, stayed late, and ensured David's coffee was precisely 160 degrees Fahrenheit. I was the invisible cog that kept his well-oiled machine running. But David saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone, a convenient scapegoat, a talent to exploit. It wasn't always overt. Sometimes it was a subtle dig during a meeting, a barely perceptible roll of his eyes when I spoke, a withering comment about my lack of ambition. Other times it was blatant. He'd rewrite my reports at the last minute, presenting them as his own. He'd take credit for my ideas in front of senior management, basking in the applause while I stood silently, seething. I documented everything, every slight, every stolen idea, every humiliation. I knew deep down that one day I'd need it all. The breaking point came with Project Phoenix. I poured my heart and soul into it. Months of sleepless nights, countless hours of research, and meticulous planning culminated in what I genuinely believed was a game-changer for the company. I presented it to David, my voice trembling slightly with a mixture of nerves and excitement. He listened, his expression unreadable. A week later, Project Phoenix was presented to the board, not by me, but by David. He stood there, radiating confidence, delivering my presentation word for word, claiming my insights as his own. The board was ecstatic. They lauded David as a visionary, a genius. I watched from the sidelines, a knot of fury tightening in my chest. The promotion I'd been promised, the recognition I deserved, all stolen in broad daylight. That night, I didn't sleep. The betrayal was a burning ember in my gut, igniting a fire that wouldn't be extinguished. I realized then that playing by the rules was a fool's game. David had proven that the only way to win was to be ruthless, to be cunning, to be him, but better, much better. That night I started planning my revenge. It wouldn't be quick, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be devastatingly effective. I would become David's worst nightmare. I would become his new boss. My days at Davidson Corp took on a new dimension. I was still the dutiful assistant, fetching coffee and organizing meetings. But beneath the surface, I was a predator, patiently stalking my prey. I used my position to gather information, to understand the inner workings of the company, to identify its weaknesses. I started small. I learned about Davidson Corp's key clients, their needs, their frustrations. I cultivated relationships with them, offering solutions to problems they hadn't even voiced yet. I was careful not to overstep, to remain in David's shadow. But I subtly planted seeds of doubt about his leadership, his vision. Meanwhile, in the evenings and on weekends, I was building my own empire. I had always been a tech enthusiast, dabbling in coding and web development. I dusted off those skills and started working on a startup, a direct competitor to Davidson Corp. I named it Phoenix Solutions, a deliberate jab at David, a constant reminder of his treachery. I bootstrapped the company, using my savings and taking on freelance gigs to fund its development. I recruited a small team of talented developers and marketers, people who had been overlooked and undervalued, just like me. They were hungry, driven, and fiercely loyal. I shared my vision with them, my plan for revenge, and they were all in. They understood the injustice, the burning desire for retribution. Phoenix Solutions began to take shape. We focused on providing innovative, cutting-edge solutions that Davidson Corp couldn't offer. We were agile, responsive, and obsessed with customer satisfaction. Slowly but surely, we started poaching clients from Davidson Corp. It was a delicate dance, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. I had to be careful not to arouse David's suspicion, to maintain the illusion of incompetence. But the more clients we stole, the bolder I became. I started leaking information to the press, exposing Davidson Corp's outdated technology and inefficient processes. The company's stock price began to plummet. David was frantic. He couldn't understand what was happening, who was undermining him. He suspected me, of course. He started watching me more closely, scrutinizing my every move. But I was always one step ahead. I had anticipated his paranoia and created a network of misinformation, leading him down blind alleys and wasting his time. The pressure was mounting. David was cracking. He became more erratic, more abusive. His paranoia consumed him. He started lashing out at everyone, including his superiors. His grip on the company was loosening. I knew the time was right to make my move. I approached Davidson Corp's board of directors with a proposal. Phoenix Solutions would acquire the company. I presented a compelling case, highlighting Davidson Corp's declining market share, its outdated technology, and its lack of innovation. I promised to revitalize the company, to restore its former glory. The board was initially skeptical. They saw me as nothing more than David's assistant, a nobody. But I had done my homework. I knew their concerns, their motivations. I offered them a deal they couldn't refuse, a generous buyout price, guaranteed positions in the new company, and a promise to protect their reputations. They deliberated for days, weighing their options. David fought tooth and nail to prevent the acquisition, but his credibility was shattered. His paranoia and erratic behavior had alienated him from the board. They no longer trusted him. Finally, they voted in favor of the buyout. The news sent shockwaves through Davidson Corp. David was stunned. He couldn't believe that his own assistant had orchestrated his downfall. The acquisition was swift and brutal. Phoenix Solutions took control of Davidson Corp. I was appointed CEO. David was demoted to a junior position, reporting directly to me. The tables had turned. The first time I saw David after the acquisition, he was a broken man. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a look of utter despair. I summoned him to my office, the same office he had once occupied. He stood before me, trembling, his gaze fixed on the floor. "David," I said, my voice cold and clinical. "Have a seat." He sat down slowly, his movements stiff and awkward. "I wanted to thank you," I said, "for everything." He looked up, his eyes filled with confusion. "For the humiliation, the mistreatment, the stolen ideas," I continued. "For making my life hell. You see, without you, I would never have become who I am today. You pushed me, you challenged me, you forced me to become stronger, more resilient, more ruthless." I paused, letting my words sink in. "And most of all," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "thank you for Project Phoenix. It was the catalyst, the spark that ignited my revenge." David's face turned pale. He finally understood the depth of my betrayal. "Now," I said, leaning forward, "get out of my office and get back to work. I have a lot of coffee to drink, and I need someone to fetch it for me. Make sure it's 160 degrees Fahrenheit." He stood up slowly, his eyes filled with hatred. He turned and walked out of the office, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched him go, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. My revenge was complete. I was finally his boss. The atmosphere at the newly rebranded Phoenix Davidson was electric. The old guard, the complacent executives who had coasted on David's coattails, were gone. In their place were young, ambitious, and fiercely loyal employees, many of whom I had personally recruited from Phoenix Solutions. I implemented sweeping changes, overhauling the company's outdated technology, streamlining its inefficient processes, and fostering a culture of innovation and collaboration. I empowered my employees, giving them the autonomy and resources they needed to succeed. I rewarded them for their hard work and dedication, and I protected them from the kind of abuse I had suffered under David. Phoenix Davidson quickly became a force to be reckoned with. We regained our lost market share, attracted new clients, and launched groundbreaking products that revolutionized the industry. The company's stock price soared. I was hailed as a visionary leader, a turnaround artist, a business genius. David, meanwhile, languished in his junior position, a shadow of his former self. He was ostracized by his former colleagues, who now saw him as a pariah. He was subjected to the same kind of humiliation and mistreatment he had once inflicted on me. He was living my personal hell. I made sure to keep a close eye on him, to remind him of his failure, to savor his suffering. I assigned him mundane tasks, forced him to work long hours, and subjected him to endless criticism. I never let him forget that I was his boss. But as the months passed, I began to feel a sense of emptiness. My revenge had been satisfying, but it hadn't filled the void in my soul. I realized that I had become the very thing I hated, a ruthless, power-hungry tyrant. I started to question my motives. Was my revenge truly justified? Had I gone too far? Was I becoming as bad as David? The answer, I knew, was yes. I had allowed my desire for revenge to consume me, to corrupt me. I had lost sight of my values, my principles. I knew I had to change. I had to break the cycle of abuse. I had to find a way to forgive David, not for his sake, but for my own. The decision to forgive David was not an easy one. It required me to confront my own demons, to acknowledge my own flaws. It meant letting go of the anger and resentment that had fueled me for so long. I started by seeking therapy. I talked to a professional about my experiences, my feelings, my motivations. I learned about the psychology of revenge, the destructive nature of resentment, the importance of forgiveness. I realized that holding on to my anger was only hurting me. It was poisoning my soul, preventing me from moving on with my life. Forgiveness, on the other hand, was liberating. It was a way to break free from the past, to embrace the future. I also started to see David in a new light. I realized that he was not just a villain, but a flawed human being, just like me. He had his own insecurities, his own fears, his own motivations. I learned that he had grown up in a dysfunctional family, that he had been bullied and abused as a child. He had developed a defensive mechanism, a need to control and dominate others, to compensate for his own feelings of inadequacy. Understanding his background didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me to empathize with him, to see him as a person rather than a monster. I knew that forgiveness was not about condoning his actions, but about releasing myself from the burden of anger and resentment. It was about choosing to move on with my life, to focus on the future rather than the past. I decided to reach out to David. I invited him to lunch, not as his boss, but as a fellow human being. He was surprised by my invitation, but he accepted it. We met at a small cafe near the office. The atmosphere was tense. We sat in silence for a few minutes, unsure of what to say. "David," I said finally, "I wanted to apologize." He looked up, his eyes filled with disbelief. "I know I haven't been easy on you," I continued. "I know I've been deliberately making your life miserable, and for that, I'm truly sorry." He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. "I realized that my revenge was wrong," I said. "It didn't make me feel any better. It only made me feel worse. I allowed my anger to consume me, and I became the very thing I hated." I paused, taking a deep breath. "I forgive you, David," I said. "For everything. For the humiliation, the mistreatment, the stolen ideas. For Project Phoenix, I forgive you." Tears welled up in his eyes. He reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you, Jeremy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for forgiving me. I don't deserve it." We talked for hours that day. We shared our stories, our fears, our hopes. We laughed, we cried, we healed. I realized that forgiveness was not just about letting go of the past, but about building a better future. It was about creating a world where people could learn from their mistakes, where they could forgive each other, where they could move on with their lives. I knew that my journey was far from over, but I was finally on the right path. I was on the path to forgiveness, to healing, to redemption. The atmosphere at Phoenix Davidson began to change. I started treating David with respect and compassion. I gave him opportunities to prove himself, to redeem himself. I mentored him, coached him, and helped him to develop his skills. Slowly but surely, David began to regain his confidence. He started contributing to the company again, offering valuable insights and innovative ideas. He became a valuable member of the team, a trusted colleague, a true friend. I also made amends to the other employees I had mistreated during my quest for revenge. I apologized for my harshness, my arrogance, my lack of empathy. I promised to be a better leader, a more compassionate boss. I focused on creating a positive and supportive work environment where employees felt valued, respected, and empowered. I encouraged collaboration, innovation, and creativity. I fostered a culture of trust, honesty, and integrity. Phoenix Davidson continued to thrive. We launched new products, expanded into new markets, and achieved record profits. The company's reputation soared. We were recognized as a leader in our industry, a model for other companies to emulate. I eventually stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to a new generation of leaders. I remained on the board of directors, providing guidance and support, but I no longer felt the need to control everything. I had learned that true success was not about power or wealth, but about making a positive impact on the world. It was about helping others, about giving back, about creating a better future. David became the new CEO. He led the company with integrity, compassion, and vision. He transformed Phoenix Davidson into a truly exceptional organization, a place where people could thrive, where ideas could flourish, where dreams could come true. He never forgot the lessons he had learned from his past mistakes. He never forgot the importance of forgiveness, of redemption, of second chances. And he never forgot the day I became his new boss. The day that changed both our lives forever. Epilogue. Years later, I sat on a sunny beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. I was retired, wealthy, and at peace with myself. I had finally found happiness, not in revenge, but in forgiveness. I received a phone call from David. He was calling to tell me about a new initiative Phoenix Davidson was launching, a program to help underprivileged youth find employment. He wanted me to be involved. I smiled. I knew then that my journey had come full circle. I had started as a victim, but I had become a victor, not through revenge, but through forgiveness. And now, I was helping others to do the same. The fluorescent lights of Davidson Corp were long gone, replaced by the warm glow of the setting sun. My personal hell had been transformed into a personal paradise, and I owed it all to the boss who had made my life hell. The boss who had inadvertently set me on the path to becoming his new boss, and ultimately, a better version of myself. The cycle of revenge was broken, replaced by a cycle of forgiveness, healing, and redemption. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all.